Welcome to Dealmakers Conversations, where we sit down with M&A-minded business leaders to talk about how they run their organizations and their thoughts on deal making. In this segment, we sit down with Ryan Green, co-founder of Gridwise, to talk about his latest round of capital raise and how the company's focus shifted during COVID and made the company even more competitive. Ryan, thanks for joining us today here at the Dealmakers Conference.
Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. So Ryan, let's talk a little bit about Gridwise and some of the things you've been doing there. When you founded the company, you were initially developing a solution to help ride-sharing drivers in the gig economy who worked often more than one rideshare service. You wanted to help them, increase their earnings by tracking mileage, analyzing revenue, generating tax reports, and streamline how they operate it. Does that sound about right?
That's right on par there.
Excellent. So let me ask you this then. How receptive was the marketplace to this idea when you founded it?
Yeah, so I would say they were pretty receptive from the very beginning. And a big reason was, I think there was a few reasons, but one of them was related to the fact that I had actually driven for Uber and for Lyft previous to coming into this idea when I actually started when I was in the military. And I had gained the kind of the perception of what it was like to be gained the firsthand experience of what it was like to be a driver and experience those pain points firsthand myself. So that really helped kind of frame that we want to build because I'd actually experienced those problems. But even then, I think there were some key steps that we had taken to really gain additional validation to help us understand what is the right type of app to build. And so before, you had listed all these capabilities that our application has, our mobile app has today. But before we had all of those, our first service didn't even consist of a mobile app. So really, the first approach that we took was really focused on launching a landing page that had kind of portrayed the concept of what we thought Gridwise could be, and had pushed that out to some online social groups and forums to drivers across the country. And in about a week, we had over 500 drivers who had signed up, and through that sign up flow, over 100 plus of them had gone through and actually filled out a survey where it was a pretty extensive survey. But at the same time, drivers wrote essays and spilling their guts on their proposed problems, their problems and their proposed solutions and their strategies, and so much about their driving that was really validating and really helped us see that, like, hey, we're on the right path here. And so as we made some iterations and course corrected off of some validations to our hypotheses, we ended up launching our first service, which was actually was not a mobile app, was a text message, a weekly email and a text message service. So what we did is every Sunday we would send an email to Pittsburgh drivers, is where our focus was initially. And that email would show drivers what events were happening for the week, projected airport traffic, and other types of information that helped them kind of plan ahead, while also complementing that every day with a text message service where my co-founder and I were actually typing these messages manually ourselves, and we're really alerting drivers on if it was going to rain in the next 15 or 20 minutes, or if there was going to be a concert that was letting out in the next 45 minutes. Things that are really indicative of opportunity for earnings, but also could impact them from decreasing their earnings, such as traffic or road closures or things like that. So there was really that we had over 10% adoption in the Pittsburgh market on just that service alone, in having and had just learned so much through that, I would say, experiment or first version of our product. And so really taking that approach and all those steps had really helped set a strong foundation for helping us best frame the type of solution to build for drivers, and really kind of set the foundation for building out and scaling this mobile application.
Interesting. Ryan, how much did your financial services background as a trader of PNC help in the early days when you were thinking about raising capital?
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, I would say the job taught me a great deal, and I would say is like where, if I could point to like one area where I felt like there was the most impact, was related to financial modeling and really understanding how businesses. I got a deeper understanding of how businesses operate within being in the capital markets group at PNC, but also is I think the financial modeling is something that's just was great that I went through the experience of doing that quite a bit at the bank. And as I went into fundraising, I think that's a key part of the narrative for fundraising, and really is like, showing that you can understand the levers of the business and can help others see what those are and how those kind of fruition out into the next 1, 2, 3 years or further. But it's also important for just operating your business on a day-to-day basis. So I think that was a big contributor to that, in the experience that I gained from PNC that led to part of the success of fundraising as well.
Part of that success is you've raised more than $6 million that you were using to expand outward into multiple cities before COVID hit. Were you hitting those benchmarks pre-COVID and that raise?
Yeah, we had set out some pretty aggressive milestones, but I would say is that at that point we were scaling. I think through the year of 2019 going into 2020, we had just come off expanding from about 4 cities to over 35 cities, and we're growing at about 15% month over month in revenue and active users. And so we're actually exceeding, I would say, the initial milestones that we had laid out. And we're really had strong momentum going into COVID.
So COVID hits in March, effectively shutting down the ride-sharing business as we know it, along with most of the economy.
Yeah, you could say that.
Ryan, what'd you learn about yourself in the business in short order at that time that maybe you didn't think about or that hadn't been exposed yet?
I would say, let's start with the business. The business side is, I would say, it really, although there were so many negative aspects to COVID that still are persisting today, there's a lot of, out of every negative, I think comes positives as well. And so when we think about that from a business standpoint, is it really helped us take a more keen approach into really auditing and being more keen in how we audit the performance of our team, the individuals who are performing in the team, and really our expenditures as well. I think we started to see that we started to be very focused on making sure that we're spending on things that really bring value back to the business or are actually contributing to growth. And there were definitely some areas where we weren't doing that effectively. And so I think that really started to shed light into some of those areas, but also COVID exposed some vulnerabilities in our business. Part of it was related to our business model. I think as we did see a hit from COVID, from as the pandemic started to become more prominent in March, and it caused us to make some iterations that have really positioned us in a much better place for the business, and is put us to where we're seeing better growth than we were pre-COVID. And then I would say is in terms of the second part of that was like the vulnerabilities was the related to the demographics of drivers. As we had been very ride hail or ride share focused in terms of our persona of focus of drivers, and there was a large component of demographic that we weren't really focused on supporting, which at that time, but was on our roadmap, which were the delivery drivers who did food delivery, grocery delivery, parcel, and so that was really, we saw that was a vulnerability, as ride hail obviously took over 80% hit at that time. For myself, particularly, I would say I can't point to anything particular about myself that I learned that I didn't know at that time. But what I can say is that it really it felt somewhat nostalgic, but it was a familiar feeling of taking me back to the military days where you're just training day in and day out for wartime. And really, as that comes, you're ready for it because of all the training drills and everything that you've gone through to that point. And so I felt like, as COVID came to fruition for our business in the industry, it became wartime at that point, and you kind of turn into this. I think there's a term called like a wartime CEO, and so it was something that I felt like was ready for as a leader in the company, and took on as I came about.
One of the things that you pivoted towards, really reprioritized, is these delivery services. But at the same time, you've kind of made some, I guess, growth into the B2C market beyond what you were already doing into now this B2B market with Gridwise Analytics. Can you talk a little bit about what you're doing there and this larger focus and the opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, we're really excited to have launched. I think recently on the B2C side, focusing on the driver side, is being able to encompass the delivery drivers as a whole now, and so now we're supporting both. We have capabilities and are providing utility to delivery and ride hail drivers. But and as we're doing so, we're expanding our capabilities outside of just what we provide in the app, but also in building a marketplace of services for the drivers. And so think what's on the horizon for us there is as we've just launched an income protection product. We've just launched what we call that's Gridwise Protection, and we've just launched Gridwise Gas, where it's eliminating drivers from having to pay retail prices at the pump through our gas cards that we provide them. So we'll be building out more of a marketplace with auto insurance products, phone plans and protection, financial service products as well, and more that's kind of on our marketplace map. And then from a B2B standpoint, we're really excited to have just launched over this past week what we call Gridwise Analytics. It's more of our B2B or enterprise side of our business, where we're essentially aggregating and anonymizing all of this mobility data that's really we've encompassed of understanding supply and demand across so many different major service providers, and are now providing access to these analytics to both corporate and municipal entities to help them understand how people and goods are moving across gig mobility services, which hasn't existed in this industry up to this point.
It's absolutely fascinating. So you've got a lot of things going on there, Ryan, with Gridwise. They all seem exciting. Which one excites you the most?
You know, I don't know if I could pick. I think it's. I don't know if I could pick one that excited me more than the other. I'm really humbled and always excited about what we can do to empower gig workers and this new wave of workers. And we're just scratching the surface for just I think some of the gaps that are needed to be filled related to empowerment of this worker and just overall more equitable work environment for them. And so that's exciting. I think that's really motivating us day in day out as a team. But we're really excited for this next phase or enhancement or addition to the business that's enabling us to also empower all the other stakeholders who are operating directly within mobility or interfacing with it in some capacity, and really solidifying Gridwise as the go-to provider of any gig mobility solutions. As this, which is for us exciting because these services are becoming the standard for how people and goods move in cities. So it's a really exciting time for us.
It certainly sounds like it, and we can't wait to watch our eyes on your growth and keep watching what you're doing. So, Ryan, congratulations, and thank you so much for joining us here at the Dealmakers Conference.
Thanks for having me.
That was great insight, and most definitely a company to watch. Next up, Smart Business Senior Editor Adam Burrows sits down with Sara Clevenger of Blue River Financial Group to talk about the private equity market in Western Pennsylvania and the trends that her firm is seeing.
Obviously, a lot has changed with businesses and the market since 2020. When we chatted before the interview, you said that this has led to a new, unexpected phase of creativity driven by the urgent pandemic-fueled need for operational innovation. This, as you've pointed out, has affected everything. Big picture, in what ways does this affect M&A?
What's occurred in 2020 is really meaningful change that I think is at an advanced speed beyond what any of us could have anticipated. There's been so many observations in the months recently made about digital transformation and how much that has changed organizations and really positioned us to lead an incredible level of impact and innovation in 21. So everything about how we do business has been impacted. How we reach customers, how we engage customers, channels with which we use and leverage, our supply chains, how we engage our employees in the distance and remote workforce. So the speed of change, as many have observed, really kind of 5 years of change in a 5-month period in the middle part of 2020. So we began at a new place as we move into this new year. From the standpoint of M&A, we have to address how that has impacted our business. Are we resilient enough if we're at a strategic acquirer, can we really use M&A as a core strategy to address the opportunities to capitalize on the new innovations that we may not have had coming into the year?
You had talked about the importance of sellers right now understanding, or at least being aware of, how buyers think. What insight can you offer sellers as to the buyer mindset in this moment? And what adjustments might sellers make, given the buyer mindset, to reach their desired outcome?
Absolutely. So, sellers, I think one of the best recommendations that we could offer is that if you're thinking about selling the business, to really step back and become attuned to every level of scrutiny that a buyer is going to use in addressing the business. One of the primary drivers of that is the sustainability and defendability of your revenue channels. In 2020, that was interrupted for industries far and wide. Just about every industry was impacted one way or another. Many buyers are thinking about addressing valuation through a normalization or maybe a 9-month average applied over 2020. But taking a hard assessment of every facet of our business, looking at the management team. Is the management team prepared to address the new opportunities in 2021? Looking at the defendability of the revenue channels. Have we made the right adaptations? Have we leveraged technology and the insights and applied the analytics that it affords to really propel the revenue streams in a defendable, repeated way? A buyer is really going to scrutinize and look to ensure stability, while the volatility of the last 12 months, begins to wane. So those types of insights and taking a very hard look are key. We often say that the best time to do a transaction is when the owner is ready, the market is ready, and the business is ready. And all three of those really have to work together with a very scrutinous, objective look, given all of the changing tide of the last 12 months.
Often, revenue or EBITDA history is the measuring stick by which buyers determine value. But I imagine a company's raw number history, without context, might not tell the whole story right now. What are buyers looking for in terms of seller performance through the pandemic? What factors could maybe speak louder than pure year-over-year financial data?
Absolutely. That's a conversation that is so imperative to consider as you're preparing to address the market and preparing to launch a process or to consider a sale. And so from the standpoint of how to think about value, gone is the concept of normalizing to what might have been a 2019 performance. So while we're typically looking at making adjustments and understanding the impact that 2020 had, we can't just look at it as a comparison to 2019 normal. Those days are gone. We are now in a new landscape. And so we really have to look at forward performance, projections, but tie those to the budget. So as an owner is considering entering the market or positioning its exit plan or narrative of value, it's imperative that the financials are tying to the forecast. And so if you can monitor that in a scrutinous way month to month and make sure that you're delivering and creating that, year over year picture, that's absolutely key. And then you're telling the story to the buyer that's believable and defendable, that the new normal, right, is tying to the forecasts that you're projecting.
How about acquirers? There are reasons, I gotta believe, for buyers to understand seller mindsets in the moment. What insight can you offer to buyers on how sellers are feeling? And how might that affect buyers' acquisition approach or strategy?
The market from the buyer perspective is certainly as competitive as ever. That's no secret. That's been a common known backdrop going into 2020 and certainly going into this year and in the very, in the months ahead. So, sellers are, some of the observations that we're having and the conversations that we're having with business owners is that there's an acceleration to enter the market. There's concern and some fear and emotion tied to pending tax changes, the volatility that we've all come out of, the fatigue of navigating the last 12 months. So it's fair to say that some businesses have entered the market at a faster pace than perhaps they were truly ready to address, or perhaps that the business was truly ready to address. So I think there will need to be some scrutiny into the quality of the opportunity, the readiness of the seller, really understanding the process, being emotionally prepared. So I think those are absolutely key. Given the competitive dynamics, it's imperative that acquirers are deliberate and strategic about putting forth a strategy. Know exactly what you're looking to do. And in 2021 and beyond, taking advantage of this new landscape that we're in and bringing your organization to a new level through strategic acquisitions is a phenomenal opportunity to address that transformation gap that we've all been through. So being very clear and articulate as to what the strategy is, identifying your organization's offensive acquisition strategy. Perhaps that's unlocking new customer segments. Perhaps that's new product lines that you don't currently have, and accelerating that through acquisition can be an outstanding approach. Additionally, be aware of the defensive strategy, that defensive market position, and how those two play in tandem. A game isn't won with just one or the other. It's really got to be both working in support of each other. So I think in order to be successful at an acquisition strategy in these days, it's imperative that we're mindful of what's on the mind of sellers, what's motivating sellers, the rush to the market that we're seeing, in addition to being very clear and articulated as to the focus strategy on the acquisition side, what you're looking to achieve, and building backward from there.
As we close out the conversation here, I wanted to ask, the term new normal gets dropped into M&A conversations a lot now. I'd like to understand, what does the term mean to you in the context of M&A? What's maybe being left behind that we'll likely never miss? And what adjustments do you think some in this space have yet to make to essentially catch up to now?
Some of the dynamics that we're all, I think, finding ourselves in and seeing really drive the narrative of this market is speed, acceleration, efficiency, operational efficiency, process efficiency. Many people, professionals, have been fragmented, working somewhat siloed, found ways to connect and still address cultural needs with two organizations, coming into alignment. So, preparing for that, preparing for what that means for integration, preparing for what that means with retaining customers and retaining your employees, that's absolutely paramount. So again, given this digital transformation and how it leads to innovation in 2021, a lot of these operational efficiencies and plans have been going on somewhat behind the scenes, right? As we've all sort of come out of heads down, take a look at the operation, implement new best practices. And so a lot of us anticipate that as we find ourselves in this new year, as optimism continues to really transform so many opportunities, the ability to be agile, engaged, and find a way to stay connected and evolve in this new place, truly leveraging technology is absolutely key. These are the things that we find ourselves in today. Those of us that don't embrace that will be challenged, and the best outcomes will be for the organizations that can take that in stride and really take advantage of this new normal.
Great stuff, Sarah. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we hope you enjoyed this segment of Dealmaker's Conversations. If you don't know where you're headed next, please visit the My Agenda tab and find your interests. We'll see you back here for the next Dealmaker's Conversations in about an hour.